Hello, in this video we'll be taking a look at the autosomal DNA predicted phenotype traits and GD match results of a western lowland gorilla. Her name is Oko and she's a woman. I should say she's a female because woman tends to apply to human individuals, and she's not really a human. She's from the University of Pompeu, which I think is in Spain. And here's what she's predicted to look like. She's predicted to have dark brown eyes, snub-shaped nose, and black hair with my NOSHACOT tool. With Y-sex, she's also predicted to have, the same kind of traits: black hair, dark skin, brown eyes. When it comes to my eye shape predictor, my eye shape predictor tool is saying that she had sub-Saharan African, or basically, black eye shape. You can see the prediction for eye shape prediction is 96% sub-Saharan African, and very insignificant percentages for the other groups. So it seems that in terms of variants that have to do with eye shape, her genotype is kind of similar to Africans and sub-Saharan Africans overall. When it comes to other coloring variants, she doesn't really have any light coloring variants that are implicated in light color in humans, aside from some variations in OCA2 and SLC24A4 and even TIRP1. The TIRP1 variants kind of surprised me because they're actually pretty, they actually have a pretty significant weight in determining eye and hair color. For example, RS683, you can see it on the screen here. Out of these six variations that I wrote on the screen, RS683 is by far the one with the biggest impact, and it's kind of surprising that you see a gorilla have light color variants in this variation that's implicated in light color variants in humans. Now, she's heterozygous for this one variation in CACNA2D3 gene, and which means that there is variation among gorillas in this SNP. This is very interesting, as this SNP is also implicated in human morphology, and she's homozygous for every other variation. Homozygous means there is, typically, if you see somebody from another species and they're homozygous for like every variation, what that means is that this is a typical genotype for representatives of their species. There is no variation in their species, and they all have pretty much the same exact result. That's why maybe this is my third video on gorillas. That's why making 3 videos on gorillas might be a little bit redundant, right? Because I've already made 2 and they're all pretty similar to each other. She's predicted to have kinky hair with my hair ID tool, which is kind of interesting because gorillas don't really have kinky hair. Gorillas have very straight hair. Now let's talk about her results with my genome analyzer tool. So this is on my website, which you will find on the About Me page on my YouTube. If you click on my YouTube channel and you read About Me, you will find the link to my website, and on my website you will find this tool, which I developed to make my life a little bit easier. Let's see, where is she? This is here she is. Okay, open her and click Analyze Genome, and we're gonna get a nice little summary of the variants I typically look for. So she's got, let me enlarge the screen a little bit so you can see everything. Alright, she's got GG in this variation of COMT, which means Val or warrior genotype, higher activity of the COMT enzyme and quicker breakdown of dopamine. She's got GG in this variation of COMT, which typically results in a higher risk of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Okay, she's got TT genotype in this variation of MAOA, which leads to lower activity of the MAOA enzyme and slower breakdown of dopamine, thus higher dopamine levels and certain advantages in attention tasks. So this is the opposite of COMT, because you see the genotype GG in COMT's Val-Met variation means warrior, which means essentially less dopamine and quicker dopamine reuptake. And she's got TT genotype in this variation of MAOA, which is the opposite of that, which is basically lower activity of the MAOA enzyme, so less slower breakdown of dopamine and more dopamine in the system. These two genotypes, they kind of cancel each other out in terms of the phenotype. So no go-learner variants in DRD2's pro-frenetin pro variation. This is what you would expect, right? You wouldn't expect a monkey to have European pro-frenetin pro variation. However, I've made videos on baboon, and actually I've analyzed 2 baboons at this point, and they both had no, not two baboons, one baboon and one macaca. So the baboon and the macaca, they both had European no-go learner variants here, which is kind of surprising. Like, why do they have this? Okay, so the gorilla has GG in this variation of DRD2, meaning less dopamine D2 receptors and decreased risk of schizophrenia. GG in this variation of DRD2, which means typical genotype for most humans and lower risk of schizophrenia and nicotine dependence. I think this is a human mutation to have AA here, for example, or having the A allele in this variation is very human, and it's also quite negative because it has a lot of negative impact on your mental health. She's got AA genotype in TOC1 variation, which means I think it's A1A1, and this is like a very monkey specific. This is a very gorilla or chimp or any kind of monkey. They tend to have A1A1 here. Most Neanderthals also have the A1 allele, maybe not A1A1, but maybe A1A2, but they tend to have the A1 allele, whereas most humans tend to have A2A2 here. So this is one of the differences in gorillas versus humans, right? So for gorillas, it's typical to have AA here, and in fact, I've never seen a gorilla or any kind of monkey with anything other than AA in this variation, and it leads to decreased number of dopamine D2 receptor sites in the brain and increased risk of alcoholism, Parkinson's, ADHD, and various other illnesses. Right, so let's move on to this variation of DRD2. Which is the typical genotype of DRD1, which is the typical genotype for most humans and leads to slightly lower risk of various mental health conditions. GG in this variation of DRD1, a typical genotype and leads to lower likelihood of autism. TT genotype in this variation of DRD1, a typical genotype associated with slightly lower odds of autism and tobacco addiction. CC genotype in this variation of DRD3, which is a rare genotype that is implicated in higher odds of OCD and intellectual disability. Okay. GG genotype in this variation of DRD3, which is a typical genotype for most humans, leading to lower odds of autism. CC genotype in this variation of DRD4, which is a typical human genotype and leads to lower or decreased risk of schizophrenia. And TT genotype in this variation of, I don't know what this is. Is this, I think this is 5-HTTT, yeah, 5-HTTT-LPR, whatever. It's very difficult to remember and pronounce. But this is basically serotonin transporter gene, and if you have short form, you're going to have some issues transporting serotonin, right? You're going to have some depression or some kind of serotonin issues. So she's got... Okay, so she does not have the long form, which means she does have the short form, which means that she does have a increased risk of depression. I worded it kind of wrongly. The way I worded it here is kind of and does not have a decrease in the risk of depression. It's like a double negative, so it may be difficult to understand what it actually means. She's got GG in this variation of MCM6, so no European lactose persistence. That's not surprising. CC in this variation of MCM6. Also no lactose persistence, no European lactose persistence. She's got GG in this variation of OXTR, which means higher levels of empathy. TT in this variation of OXTR, which means decreased OXTR expression and lower levels of empathy, as well as higher risk of autism spectrum disorder. And she's got AA in this variation of OXTR, which means higher levels of empathy and higher OXTR expression. Very surprising, because I was under the impression that various monkeys, gorillas, chimps, orangutans, they don't really have that much empathy. I guess bonobos have some empathy. I've read about them, but you know, it's interesting that maybe they have their own genes that have to do with empathy that are not OXTR. That's probably the case. So when it comes to diabetes, she's got this genotype in this variation, which leads to lower risk of type 1 diabetes. CC genotype here, which leads to 7-fold decrease in the risk of type 1 diabetes. Definitely did not have type 1 diabetes, just on the basis of this genotype alone. GG in this variation, which means lower odds of type 2 diabetes. TT genotype here, which means great increase, precisely a 2-fold increase in the risk of type 2 diabetes. Okay, this is one of the risk variations. And GG genotype here, leading to a slight decrease in the risk of type 2 diabetes. So probably not diabetic. There is only one variation for increased risk, and probably she was not. Well, I don't, you know what I'm saying, probably. I don't think any gorillas are diabetic. It's not, Or are they? I don't know. Didn't do my research into that part of the video. For hemochromatosis, doesn't have this variation, doesn't have this variant, and doesn't have this variant. So it seems that hemochromatosis might be a human illness. For Alzheimer's, TT genotype in this variation, which is a typical genotype for most humans and leads to average or slightly increased risk of Alzheimer's. GG here, which leads to lower risk of Alzheimer's. TT here, which leads to decreased risk of Alzheimer's. Okay, so it doesn't seem that she has the APOE gene, which is the biggest contributor when it comes to Alzheimer's risk. But we can't determine that because she wasn't genotyped for these two variations, which have to do with APOE. For myopia, she's got AA here, which is the typical genotype and leads to slightly increased risk of myopia or nearsightedness. Okay, AA here, which leads to a decrease in the risk of myopia, and AA here, which also means a decreased risk of myopia. I don't think gorillas have myopia. You know, is there any gorillas with myopia? Is there any gorillas who need glasses to see in the distance? I don't think so. Now, let's talk a little bit about her GED match results. This is what she scores with PanDNA LK16 Modern, and as you can see, she's mostly scoring Ancestor followed by Sub-Saharan. What you might not know about this calculator is that the Ancestor component was actually meant to represent Khoisan or South African hunter-gatherer specific drift, and you're going to see this with every calculator. Every calculator that looks for kind of modern human ethnicities or tries to analyze modern human ethnicities, a gorilla, a chimpanzee, any kind of ape, or even Neanderthal is going to score mostly South African hunter-gatherer or mostly a component that peaks in South African hunter-gatherers. She is scoring 98% archaic human with MDLPK23B, which is a typical score for any kind of gorilla, chimpanzee, orangutan, any kind of monkey. They always score a lot of archaic human and not anything else. Neanderthals score around 60% archaic human plus 30 to 35% of archaic African and the other 5% something else. So with the Oracle, she's getting modeled as a mixture of Sami plus Eta with very high distances. That's because even Sami don't have much archaic African component, and the Eta and these other sub-Saharan African groups, they don't have much archaic human component either. With the Eurogenes K13, she's scoring mostly sub-Saharan and Northeast African. With Harappa World, she's scoring mostly San, followed by Pygmy, followed by West African. So San is kind of this Khoisan or South African hunter-gatherer component, which if you take the genome of any gorilla or chimpanzee or orangutan or any kind of monkey or ape, they score mostly San or mostly South African hunter-gatherer like admixtures. Thanks for watching my video until the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like. If you didn't enjoy it, leave a dislike, leave a comment what exactly you dislike, and start a discussion. Thanks for watching my video until the end. You can download this sample as well as every other sample that I make videos on in 23andMe format from link which is in the description. Goodbye.